Silas Croft wiped sweat from his brow with a hand like cured leather, the July sun a physical weight pressing down on the failing Nebraska cornfield. Each stalk stood brittle and brown, a skeletal monument to another season lost to the unrelenting drought. Dust hung thick in the motionless air, gritty on the tongue, coating the world in a monochrome of despair. It was the kind of quiet that pressed on the eardrums, a vacuum waiting to be filled, and fill it did. Not with sound, but with violence. A silent, blinding flash seared the southern sky near the old gravel pit, followed instantly by a deep, gut-churning thump that vibrated up through Silas's boots and rattled the windows of his weathered farmhouse. The earth itself seemed to flinch. A plume of dirt and darker smoke, thick as clotting blood, bloomed upwards, hanging ominously against the bleached blue. No fiery streak, no trailing roar, just sudden, silent impact. Curiosity, that old farmer's habit of assessing potential disaster, warred with a deeper, colder dread in Silas's chest. He wasn't some slack-jawed yokel. Silas was a man carved by decades of drought and debt, his eyes holding a flinty intelligence honed by watching life wither under a pitiless sky. He moved with deliberate calm. He fetched his Winchester rifle from its rack, the oiled wood cool and familiar in his grip, before heading out towards the disturbance. The walk was unnerving. The usual drone of insects was absent. Even the dry rustle of dead corn seemed muted, as if the land itself held its breath. The crater, when he reached it half a mile later, was still smoking faintly, radiating a dry, unnatural heat that warped the air above it like a desert mirage. The smell was acrid, metallic, yet underneath it lurked something else, something vegetal and deeply wrong, like rotting kelp mixed with ozone. At the heart of the depression lay the object. Not large, perhaps the size of a man's torso, but impossibly dense. Obsidian black, it seemed to drink the sunlight. Veined through its surface were pulsing lines of a sickly, luminous green, like diseased capillaries carrying poison instead of blood. And it hummed. Not a sound for the ears, but a subsonic vibration that set Silas's teeth on edge and resonated deep within his bones. This was no mere rock, it felt aware. Malignantly so. Cautious as a man approaching a rattlesnake, Silas extended the rifle barrel, tapping the object. It felt harder than granite, yet oddly porous. A small fragment, no bigger than a walnut, cracked off near the muzzle's impact. Instinct, the ingrained habit of a lifetime working the earth, made him reach down to pick it up, to examine this piece of the impossible. Pain, white-hot and invasive. Not just the sear of heat, but a sharp, electric sting, like 1,000 microscopic thorns driving deep. He snatched his hand back with a hiss. On his thumb and forefinger, a smear of viscous, luminous green fluid glistened, thick as tree sap, but glowing with an internal, unhealthy light. Even as he watched, horrified, the substance seemed to flow into his pores, vanishing almost instantly, leaving behind a faint, unnatural tarnish, a metallic patina on his skin. Only a faint, crawling itch remained, intensifying rapidly into a maddening burn beneath the skin. He wiped frantically on his dusty jeans, but the sensation only deepened, spreading like spilled acid up his wrist. The tarnish deepened, darkening like old, neglected bronze. By the time the sagging porch of the farmhouse came into view, Silas was breathing hard, not from exertion, but from a rising tide of panic. The itch had become a fiery throb beneath his skin. Angry red streaks, vivid against his sun-browned flesh, traced paths up his forearm towards his elbow. His fingers felt swollen, clumsy, the skin taking on a distinct, mottled greenish-brown hue. He pushed through the screen door, its familiar creak now sounding like an alarm. His wife, Eleanor, looked up from mending at the kitchen table. Her smile died instantly, replaced by dawning horror. "Silas? Lord above, what's happened?" Her voice, usually a steady anchor in their hardscrabble life, held a tremor he'd never heard before. She dropped the cloth, her hands fluttering uselessly for a moment before reaching towards him. "Something fell," he rasped, his throat suddenly tight and dry. He held out his hand, forcing himself to look. The red streaks were livid. The skin itself was darkening, acquiring a coppery green sheen like verdigris spreading on old metal, and beneath the nails of the contaminated fingers, the tint was unmistakable. From the sky, it got on me. Panic flared bright in her eyes, momentarily eclipsing her usual practical strength. Then the farmwife's resolve slammed down. "Wash it off, now, scrub it!" She hustled him to the deep porcelain sink, grabbing the harsh lye soap. She turned the tap. Cold, blessedly cold water gushed out. Silas plunged his hand under the stream, groaning with relief as the icy shock momentarily numbed the fiery torment. Eleanor lathered the soap, scrubbing furiously at his skin, her knuckles white, trying to scour away the unnatural patina. The relief was profound, blissful, and treacherously short-lived. As the water flowed over his inflamed skin, Silas watched, frozen in a paralysis of disbelief. Where the water touched the reddest, most swollen parts of his hand, tiny, almost invisible green filaments began to emerge from his pores. Not slowly, but with obscene speed, like time-lapse footage of fungus blooming. They thickened, coiling and intertwining, forming a nascent, vibrant green moss right before their eyes, the verdigris becoming living growth. "No!" Eleanor gasped, jerking back as if electrocuted. The bar of soap slipped from her fingers, landing with a dull thud in the sink. It's feeding on the water." The words were a death knell. The coolness hadn't soothed, it had awakened the invader. The itching exploded into 1,000 white-hot needles of agony, racing up his arm with terrifying speed, carrying the green tide with it. He tore frantically at the cuff of his work shirt, buttons pinging off the walls. Beneath the faded denim fabric, a latticework of that same vibrant alien green was spreading across his forearm, thickening even as they stared, hardening into rough, bark-like patches crusted with that unnatural metallic green sheen. He could feel it, not just on the surface, but inside, tendrils rooting deep, drawing sustenance from his very tissues, his blood. A cold vegetative presence bloomed in his mind, whispering of damp earth and endless, hungry growth. Their children, 8-year-old Jonah and 5-year-old Lila, drawn by the commotion, stood wide-eyed and trembling in the doorway. Jonah's face, usually bright with curiosity, crumpled into pure terror. "Daddy, you're turning green, like that old penny in the well." That night was a slow, excruciating unraveling of humanity. Silas lay writhing on their iron-framed bed, the thin mattress soaked through with cold, viscous sweat. Sweat that seemed to actively nourish the parasite within him. The verdigris spread relentlessly, a creeping map of conquest. It crusted over his left eye, sealing it shut behind a thin, veined membrane of leaves that pulsed faintly with internal light, the texture rough and scaled. It thickened his tongue, making his speech a wet, guttural rasp. Worse than the physical violation was the mental intrusion. Whispers, not in words, but in raw intentions and alien sensations, flooded his consciousness. Images of damp, fecund earth, of relentless, mindless growth, of roots questing through deep, lightless places. A vast vegetative hunger pulsed within him, ancient and utterly devoid of mercy. It whispered of spreading, of consuming, of the long rain coming. Eleanor, armed only with desperation, sewing scissors, and a bottle of pungent rubbing alcohol, became a battlefield nurse. She tried to cut away the encroaching growths on his neck, now hardened like aged greenish metal. The scissors snagged on the fibrous matter, which bled a thick, chlorophyll-green sap that smelled like crushed weeds and burning wire. Where the alcohol splashed, the growths recoiled momentarily, hissing like angry snakes, releasing that foul ozone smell. But the relief was fleeting. The tendrils surged back thicker, angrier, more determined, the verdigris deepening. Silas screamed, a sound muffled by the moss now filling his mouth and throat. The pain was horrific, a violation that scraped his soul raw. He was being hollowed out, replaced by something that gleamed with a sickly, metallic life. "Get the children out," Silas managed to gargle, the words bubbling through the obstruction. His voice was barely recognizable, a wet rattle. "Take them, to town, now, before it." He couldn't finish. The alien presence pushed against his will, urging surrender. Eleanor hesitated, torn between the terror for her husband and the primal, clawing need to protect her young. Her eyes darted between Silas's transforming body and the terrified faces of her children. Before she could move, Jonah, driven by a child's desperate love and incomprehension of the horror, darted forward. He held a glass of water, condensation beating on its sides. "Drink, Daddy. It'll make you better. It always does." His small voice trembled, but he pressed the cool glass insistently against Silas's moss-crusted lips. Moisture, life, new ground. The alien presence in Silas's mind erupted with silent, triumphant fury. His arm, now more root than flesh, a gnarled greenish limb ending in twig-like protrusions sheathed in that coppery patina, shot out with shocking speed. not to take the glass, but to clamp around Jonah's small wrist with terrifying strength. The boy shrieked, high and pure, a sound that shattered the oppressive silence of the room. As Silas's corrupted flesh made contact, the green filaments, sensing fresh, fertile ground, visibly leaped from his fingers onto Jonah's skin. They burrowed in like hungry microscopic worms, vanishing beneath the surface, even as the boy struggled, leaving behind an immediate, darkening stain on his skin. Chaos, pure and primal, erupted. Eleanor screamed, a raw sound of maternal terror, and threw herself forward, prying at Silas's grip with superhuman strength born of panic. Lila, crying hysterically, stumbled backward out of the room, her wails echoing down the hallway. Silas roared, a sound of utter despair and alien fury grotesquely mingled as the thing inside him celebrated the new conquest. He saw the abject horror in his wife's eyes, the luminous green already flowering like tiny obscene buds on Jonah's arm where he'd been touched, saw the fragile world he'd built ending not in fire but in suffocating, creeping verdigris. Driven by the last, desperate ember of Silas Croft, the man, the husband, the father, he convulsed off the bed. He moved with a terrible stiff gait, like a marionette made of old waterlogged wood and tarnished metal, fighting against the invasive control. He ignored Eleanor's ragged pleas, Jonah's terrified sobs. He staggered out into the dim hallway, each step an agony of will, towards the locked gun cabinet in the shadowed front room. The key hung on a nail beside it. His fingers, thick and clumsy, knotted with fibrous growth and that hard, greenish scale, fumbled desperately, dropping the key once, twice, his vision blurring as the green film thickened over his remaining eye. Let it happen, the whispers hissed, soothing now, seductive. They filled his mind with images, cool, welcoming dampness, the ecstasy of unfettered growth, roots drinking deep from dark, rich earth, become, spread, feed, the water comes, the long rain, it feeds us all. Visions flooded his besieged consciousness, thick, green tendrils, gleaming with unnatural moisture, snaking down the dusty county road towards Harlan's Creek, only 5 miles distant. Slithering unseen into the town's deep wells, coiling through the labyrinthine water pipes, blooming suddenly from kitchen faucets, from shower heads, erupting from the mouths of unsuspecting townsfolk as they drank, tainting them with the same consuming patina. He saw the world not drowned in water, but in a silent, creeping tide of ravenous green, life consumed by a life that was corrosion. With a final, monumental effort that tore at the core of his being, Silas jammed the key home, twisted it with a grinding screech, and yanked the cabinet door open. The smell of gun oil was a brief, familiar comfort. He grabbed the cold weight of his double-barreled shotgun. The metal felt alien against his corrupted palm. He fumbled shells from the box on the shelf, his vision tunneling, the green film now a solid curtain over his sight. He managed to load one barrel. His arms, heavy and stiff, refused to raise the weapon to his shoulder. "Put it down," the presence commanded, its voice now a deafening, leafy rustle filling the cavern of his skull. "Join us. Your young is ours now. The others will follow. We hunger. We are the verdure, the verdigris. Tears, thick and viscous like tree sap, welled in his sealed eye sockets." He raised the heavy gun with immense, jerking effort. Not to his shoulder, but under his chin, the cold, unforgiving muzzle pressing hard into the rough, bark-like flesh, sheathed in hard, greenish scale beneath his jaw. He thought of Eleanor's face in the golden light of their wedding day, of Jonah's infectious laugh chasing butterflies, of Lila's small, trusting hand in his calloused one. He thought of the dry, dead corn and the cool, deceptive promise of water that brought only the blight. He hooked his thumb, thick and root-like, over both triggers. The blast was catastrophic in the confined space, a brutal, shattering roar that tore through the oppressive silence. Silas Croft's body, already more than half consumed by the invader, collapsed backward. The constraints shattered, thick, ropey vines, glistening with fresh, obscene growth, and that unmistakable metallic green patina erupted from the ruin of his head and neck. They snaked across the worn floorboards with terrifying speed, questing, seeking, drawn towards the faintest hint of moisture in the air, towards the terrified life upstairs. Upstairs, Eleanor clutched Jonah to her, rocking him, trying futilely to scrub the blossoming green patches, already hardening, taking on that coppery sheen from his arm with her bare hands, her tears falling onto his feverish skin. It was spreading faster now, visibly pulsing, feeding on her terror, on Jonah's sweat. She heard the gunshot, a jagged sound that stopped her heart mid-beat. Then in the ringing aftermath, she heard it, a soft, wet, insidious rustling sound, like 1,000 leaves stirred by a slow, subterranean tide. It came from the stairs. She looked towards the open bedroom door, her blood turning to ice. Thick, ropey vines, slick with fresh green growth, and something darker, sheathed in a hard, verdigris crust, were already curling over the threshold, probing the floorboards. Behind them, a deeper green shadow seemed to pulse and writhe in the hallway gloom. Downstairs, through the shattered pane of the front window, she saw them. The first fat, heavy drops of rain beginning to fall on the parched, cracked earth. Plink, plink, plink. Then a steady drumming began. The forecast hadn't lied. The long rain was here, a soaking, relentless downpour. Jonah whimpered, his skin erupting in clusters of tiny, budding leaves, where the filaments had taken deepest hold, the skin around them darkening rapidly. The rustling grew louder, more pervasive, filling the house, a sound like 1,000 tiny roots boring relentlessly into wood, into plaster, into flesh. It wasn't just coming from the stairs anymore. It vibrated in the walls. It whispered from under the bed. It pulsed inside Jonah's small chest with each ragged breath, a creeping internal tarnish. Eleanor opened her mouth to scream, to curse the sky, to rail against the horror. But only a soft sigh emerged, a sound like wind sighing through tall, dead grass. Outside, the rain fell harder, a steady, drenching curtain on the Croft farm. And in the fields, where only dust and despair had been hours before, a vibrant, impossible green began to spread. Not a healthy green, but a voracious, luminous blight, its surface gleaming with a hard, unnatural patina under the downpour. It crept over the dead corn stalks, suffocating them, reaching its questing, silent tendrils out towards the distant, vulnerable lights of Harlan's Creek. Verdigris spread, nourished by the long rain. If you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like, comment, or share this video with your friends. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories like this one.